Hi, I'm Daniel Fisher and welcome to another episode of Synth Clips. Today's Synth Clip is about choosing a waveform, a wave shape, a wave sample. It's basically the first starting block of building your own patch from an INIT. And in a previous episode, we had talked about an INIT being a very plain patch that doesn't do anything to the sound over time, has no effects, everything is as plain as can possibly be. And that's a great way to choose your waveform because you don't want to hear any of that. You want to hear this as plain and raw as possible. So while this sounds nice as a piano, it's really better to start with an INIT. So I'm going to go to User, and here is an INIT patch. And here's piano on it, but it doesn't sound nearly as good, okay? Because it doesn't have the reverb and the filters and the envelopes and everything that makes it right. But it's ideal for choosing your waveform. So on a regular synthesizer that just does geometric waveforms, you might have sine or triangle or saw or square or pulse or noise, and you can dial through those. And what you're listening for is what sounds closest to what it is I'm going for. Or if you don't know what you're going for, and that's perfectly all right when you're making patches, just dial one that you like. You know, oh, I want to start from this sound, okay? And remember, even though the very first thing you did was choosing a waveform or wave shape or a sample, you can always go back and change it to something else and leave most of the other stuff intact. So it's not like I can't go back and change it, but it's good to start here. If you don't know what wave shape you're working on, how could you possibly make filter decisions or envelope decisions or things like that? What I have here is the Roland Juno-DS, which is filled with many thousands of key maps of instrumental samples, synth samples, sound effect samples, etc. You could just sit and dial through every possible sample every time that you do things, but that's going to get old really quick, especially since there are many thousands of these things. So now we're going to take an INIT patch, like we talked about in a previous episode, and we're going to go to the page that lets you choose the wave. Now, Rolands typically have 4 parts. We're only going to use one of them, and I'll show you how we do that. So we go into the menu, and we hit Edit, and we're going to edit the patch. And you can have up to 4 parts. I'm only going to have one on. We don't want to be hearing multiple waves. And this one chooses which part I'm editing. So I know I'm only listening to part 1. I'm only editing part 1. And I'm on the wave page. And I can tell that part 1 is checked. And so I come down here. And the Juno-DS has so many waves that they actually have different groups. There's internal A, internal B, the EXP, the expanded libraries that you can load in, and then samples where you can actually load your own user samples into it. Right now I'm just going to stick with A. And I can just sit here and go through and but that's going to take a long time. There are thousands of these. So here's some homework I'm going to make you do if the synth that you're trying to master is what we call a rompler. And it's called a rompler because it's a sampler, but the samples are in ROM, so rompler. Clever, right? And that is usually when you buy a synth that has tons and tons of pre-made samples that are built in, they give you a list of all those samples. So I have printed this one out. This is the waveform list. As you can see, it's just filled with samples. And to save you from having to go through that time and time and time again, what I recommend is get a small pack of highlighter markers. So you got a red and a yellow and an orange and a blue and a green, at a minimum, and a pink. And what you're going to do is just spend one afternoon saying, I'm just going to go through this waveform list, or at least one section. This is internal A and B and EXP and user, but go through them and just hit it and play it. And I know that it's set to a very plain sound, but that's good because you're really hearing what they sound like. And try them all, and what you're going to do, and this part's up to you. Maybe you might want to use different colors to mean the levels that you like them. I would say don't highlight anything you don't like. So instead use the colors for different categories. So for example, I don't know why, but I use orange for organ, probably because it's OR. And I use yellow for strings. I don't know why, I just do. You come up with your own. The point is that I'm going to go through this list, and when I come up with an electric piano sound that I like, I might do it in blue. Okay, and the organ in orange, and sound effects might be pink, or again, your own color scheme. And when you're done, this sheet should have lots of different colors on various ones that you like. And what it does is it saves you lots and lots of time of going through the samples that aren't interesting to you, and getting right to the ones that are interesting to you. And so, for example, if you're trying to make some really good organs, you know that all of the organs that you like are on these various pages in orange. And sure, sometimes the manufacturer will give you a list with all of the like type instruments in order, but sometimes that doesn't happen, and here's why. And this is a really interesting thing about built-in ROM samples. As manufacturers keep building on their previous synthesizer, typically the size of sample memory keeps getting bigger, and so it's really easy to just throw in all the samples from all the previous synths, and then just adding more special and larger and better sounding samples to the end of that list. But what that does is it lets them, one, make it real easy for you to make a patch that you really liked on one of your older synths by the same brand and the same family. And two, it's like, why throw those away? Even though you're getting some better samples added, for some people, that was their favorite sample ever, and you don't want to throw it away. And since sample sizes keep growing exponentially, it's just easy to keep dumping all these samples over and over. So every year, you're going to find that these lists get longer and longer and longer. Because of that, there will be some organs on page 1, but there might be some organs on page 3, and there might be some organs on page 6, and they won't be all together. Usually that'll only happen like in the first round of a certain synthesizer family where they kind of are all organized. But over time, as they keep throwing in entire banks, you're going to have repeats, and you're going to have repeats of the same types of sounds in various sections. So that's why the color coding. And just go through and listen. And one, you're just, by going through every possible sound, you're going to learn all of the possibilities that the synth has. And believe me, as the years go on, we have far more ROM key maps stored inside your synth than we have patches showing them off. And that's a really important thing. In other words, the factory patches may only show off a quarter of all of these things. There might be sounds hidden in here that you love to death that you'll never hear if you're just playing the factory patches. So by starting with an INIT and going through them, you're really going to learn all of the possibilities that you have with the synth, especially if you're trying to recreate something, and all of a sudden you discover that there's an exact sample. For example, let's say wind chimes. I mean, sure, you could go through and hand program something that sounds like wind chimes, but if there's a recording of wind chimes already done, but it wasn't used in any of the patches, and you find it and you mark it, then the next time you need wind chimes, you know it's sample 723, and you get to it. And it's just a good way to know your synth inside out. And if it's a waveform for a regular synthesizer that just has geometric waveforms, just simply go through the sine and the triangle and the square and the saw and the pulse. And it's very likely that you might change your mind afterwards. And it's just a matter of doing one little click to a different wave shape, and it's very easy to get back to the one that you had. This is just a step that I really recommend if you want to be the master of your synth. Print out your waveform list, try them all, mark down your favorites, It will save you a ton of time, and it will make your patches so much better because you're not just using the first electric piano you found or the 10th electric piano you found. It could be the 70th electric piano that was at the end of a list and you found that you really, really loved. And now it's easy for you to get to it because you just look for the color code you've chosen for electric piano and you jump to it. Now that you picked these, in particular, if you're looking to do sound effects and really weird sound effects, one thing that I really recommend is try picking different sounds and then shifting them down several octaves, because sounds can be really interesting when you take them down in pitch. So for example, I'm just going to go with what I'm on now, and yeah, so there's a piano sound way, way down. You know, imagine that into some delay and some reverb, a little bit of chorus. It can make for some really wild sounds. Conversely, if you go up higher than they're supposed to, an entirely different sound than what you would expect from a piano sample. And this can be done to drum sounds, it can be done to sound effects. Extreme tuning ranges of all of them will really show things off. And so what I recommend is, if you have a special color for sound effects, highlight that sample and then say how far you transposed it up or down in half steps. You know, so if you went up an octave, it's plus 12 or minus 32 or minus 48 to get some really wild sound. So anyway, that's how to choose waveforms and wave samples on your synth. My name is Daniel Fisher. Thank you very much for watching. If you want to see all of these, we have the playlist in the info section. If you have any questions about the Juno-DS, please contact your Sweetwater sales engineer. And as always, please subscribe to our YouTube channel if you want to see more videos like this.